Christmas Diamond, a novella, Part 5 of the Jewel series, a Jewel series, second-generation story. Inspired by the Jewel series and the Virtues and Valor series. Written by Hallee Bridgeman. Read by Jean Rowley. Chapter 1. Faith Green shifted the bill of the cotton painter's hat on her head and squinted out at the miles and miles of the Florida Keys' translucent turquoise waters. A bead of sweat rolled down her back, and she couldn't help but cringe at the music emanating from the restaurant's patio speakers. O holy night! The stars are brightly shining. It is the night of our dear Savior's birth. She thought she'd adore spending Christmas in the Florida Keys. Who knew after landing on Key West less than 3 hours ago, she could miss London's wet, cold streets as she sat on a lounge chair on a sunny beach and sipped watered-down lemonade while battling the relentless sand and humidity. After the long flight, she felt a little homesick. Even though this was business and the money was top-notch, she also regretted the necessity of spending Christmas away from hearth and home. Trying not to dwell on those thoughts, Faith looked out at the half a dozen or so brightly colored sails soaring over the water. Windsurfing looked like incredible fun to her, standing against a sail while skimming the glassy blue water, letting the sea breeze propel the vessel with amazing speed. She wondered if it was anything like flying her plane. Like that feeling of freedom she felt each time she broke above the cloud cover and emerged into an entirely different world. As she watched a purple and blue sail skim toward the shore, she contemplated if it would be possible to take some lessons sometime during her 2-week stay. As light as her cotton skirt was, she felt suffocated by the covering, and she was so unused to the heat and the humidity. Faith stood and pulled her tank top away from her torso, hoping to let some of the mild breeze in under the fabric. Normally she wore skirts unless she was in the air. Then she wore a near-perfect replica of the Women's Auxiliary Air Force uniform her grandmother had worn in the early 1940s. The thought of wearing that, even for the coming air show, made her feel even hotter. She would definitely have to invest in some shorts while she was here. As she slipped her brown sandals from her feet, she let her toes sink into the warm sand of the crystal-white beach. It felt surprisingly good beneath her bare feet. Perhaps this was better than the icy wet London streets after all, she thought. Faith looped the straps of her sandals over one finger while she strolled down to the water's edge. A wave washed onto shore and she started to back away from it, anticipating a chill like one would feel along the waters of County Durham. But as she looked around at the children splashing in the water, wearing only swimsuits, she let the water touch her, surprised at how warm it felt, almost like a tepid pot of tea. With a smile, she started strolling down the beach, sticking to the packed wet sand. Christmas lights adorned the palm trees over by the docks and dotting the strand. Behind her, the hotels and condominiums sported Christmas trees covered with artificial snow and decorations that spoke of snowflakes. The decor looked strangely incongruous in the 80-degree weather. Florida, at Christmas. How amazing was this? Faith walked down the beach, taking in the sights and smells and the feel of the lapping surf covering her toes. After just a few minutes, she looked to her right and saw that she'd left the area of the hotel and now meandered along the beach that faced some private residences. What did it take to live here, she wondered. What kind of people lived or vacationed behind those big stucco walls? Knowing the shoreline was public, she was undaunted by the private property and continued down the strand. A giggle and simultaneous squeal caught her attention, and she turned her gaze to the back of one of the big houses and its pool, and watched as a little red-haired girl with wild curly hair hurl herself from a diving board while a bigger teen boy followed. Unable to help but smile at the child's play, she didn't pay attention and tripped over the body that had washed onto shore right in front of her bare feet. She landed hard on her hands, the water washing away as the wave receded. Panicked, she spun back around. A man about her age lay on the wet sand. His eyes were closed. The skin around his lips looked blue. His skin was a deep, dark tan, though his face looked pale. A trickle of blood ran down his temple and mingled with his wet black hair. He wore only a pair of turquoise swim trunks that lay low on his hips and came to the middle of his muscular thighs. She saw a strap with one end wrapped around his ankle and the other end sheared. As she looked up, the windsurf board she assumed had once been fastened to his ankle washed up on shore about 20 yards down the beach. Faith immediately and automatically patted her pockets before she remembered she didn't yet have phone service here in America. She dropped to her knees beside him. As she laid her fingers over the artery on his neck, she yelled out,
Help! Please, help!
Her voice came out strong and clear despite the wind and surf. Her cultured British accent sounded vibrant, despite her jet lag and the surge of adrenaline that raced through her bloodstream. She found the man's pulse, but it was weak. With her right ear close to his mouth, her eyes peered down his torso. She could neither feel nor hear his breath, and did not see his chest rising or falling. As she tilted his head back and placed a hand on his forehead, she called again,
Someone, please, help!
She took a deep breath and covered his blue lips with her mouth. Within a few seconds of administering mouth-to-mouth, his entire body spasmed. He rolled his head to the side and coughed up quite a bit of the ocean. Just as he caught his breath, another man approached at a run, kicking up rooster tails of sand behind his heels as he raced toward them. Faith glanced up at the approaching man and wondered if this was her patient's twin. But as he drew quickly closer, she made out the gray at his temples and the faint wrinkles around his eyes. TJ! The man gasped as he slid to his knees next to the drowning victim. The younger man he had called TJ rolled over onto his elbow and coughed up some more salt water. The older man shot her a look again, and his eyes showing a hint of panic. "Che cos'è successo?" Faith didn't realize that he spoke to her in Italian, and really didn't realize she replied in kind to his question about what happened.
Non lo so.
I don't know, she explained. The older man blinked and shook his head, then looked back at the younger man. TJ! TJ coughed again and reached out, patting the older man on the shoulder. I'm okay, he said between coughs. Just made a real mess of it. Feel like a complete fool. That's because you very foolishly nearly died. That would have ruined Christmas for your mother, you know. The older man looked back at her now. His eyes were chocolate brown and strong, but also very kind. The resemblance between the two men was uncanny. Clearly they were father and son. The older man gripped his son's shoulder. TJ grinned at his father's teasing. I'll try to work on my timing next time I do something so reckless. To Faith, the older man said, Grazie. Thank you. He lifted his grip from his son and held his hand out to her. Thank you for saving my son's life. Faith placed her smaller hand into his large grip. The palms of his hands and his fingers felt surprisingly calloused, as if he often swung an axe or rowed an oar. Just glad I was here, she answered, relief in her voice. He released her hand and placed his over his heart. God is good, he said sincerely. All the time, she replied. His teeth flashed wide against his dark skin. I'm Tony. This is my son, TJ. Faith. You're British? So far, she smiled. And half Italian as well. You speak Italian well. My mother would have appreciated the compliment, Tony. Faith heard another set of footprints running on the beach and looked up to see an older blonde woman and a tall, thin, dark-haired young woman running toward them. Speaking of mothers, mine is just about to have a fit. Fair warning, TJ panted. And my sister won't be calm either. Tony smiled and gracefully stood. She deserves to. You did stop breathing, amato figlio. As the older man intercepted the two women, Faith looked at TJ. I'll leave you to it. No, wait, TJ pleaded, reaching for her and placing a hand on her arm. Please don't go. He sat all the way up and looked at her. Come back to the house. It's not every day a beautiful woman saves my life. He let go of her arm and held his hand out, palm up. Please, join us for dinner. Faith didn't know why she placed her hand in his, but as she did, she looked at his face. The color had returned to his lips and the skin around his eyes. He was classically handsome. Dark lashes framed dark brown eyes, and the healthy glow of his Florida tan made his skin the color of rich caramel. His hand felt warm, his palms calloused like his father's. As she smiled and nodded, he was suddenly ripped away from her grip. The blonde woman had knelt down and wrapped her arms around him before pulling him fiercely to her bosom. Are you insane? She demanded, hugging him. I don't know what happened, Mom, he said, pulling away and putting both of his hands on her shoulders. I bottomed out or something. Next thing I knew, the board slammed me in the head as I went down. He reached up and gently probed his temple. Oh, wow, that really hurts. We're going to the hospital. You're getting checked out, she stated, standing and holding out a hand. Mom, she held up a finger. No other options. Let's go. I'll drive. As her son pushed himself to his feet, Faith saw him wobble a bit. His mother slipped an arm around his bare middle and looked at the young, dark-haired woman. Madeline, run and go find your Uncle Barry and tell him to get a car ready. The young woman named Madeline nodded and raced back toward the private residence without a word. TJ held up a hand to forestall their movement, bent at the waist and retched up some sea foam, one hand on his stomach and the other on his mother's shoulder. His cheeks turned bright red, and Faith wondered why he would be so embarrassed. She lifted her hand.
Hey, TJ, how about you go get your head examined, and I'll take a rain check on that supper.
His face paled, and his father immediately came up on his other side.
Good idea, he whispered, but don't think I'll forget. Faith.
Faith watched him walk away between his parents, and some newborn part of her hoped he didn't forget either. Chapter 2. The white lights twinkling on the Christmas trees reflected in the glass balcony doors, making the room look strangely festive despite the beach decor. Faith fanned her fingers over the pine needles on the tree, admiring the decoration. Seashells and sand dollars hung from pastel peach and cream-colored ribbon woven through the branches of the tree. A strand of pearled beads served as tinsel, and a large starfish adorned the top. Faith smiled at the creativity that went into the tree in the Southern Florida hotel room. She moved to look into the full-length mirror next to the bathroom door. She ran her hands down the sides of her knee-length white dress. It was sleeveless, with wide straps that came together with rhinestone clips at the shoulders. Just 3 days in Florida, and she'd developed a healthy tan thanks to her Italian mother, and she liked the way the dress complemented her skin. She had a sheer shawl to drape over her arms, but she knew from standing on the balcony that with Florida's warm evening air, she wouldn't need it for anything other than look. She wore her black hair cropped to her chin, and normally let the natural curls just go where they may. Tonight, though, she'd straightened her hair and clipped the sides back with a diamond-encrusted hair clip her grandmother had given her. It gave her a daring, exotic look. She didn't often wear makeup, but for a dinner sponsored by the host of the air show, she applied powders and colors until her blue eyes shone and her lips had just the right amount of red. Around her neck, she wore a simple diamond solitaire pendant that matched the teardrop earrings. She looked at her watch as she slipped on some strappy sandals and grabbed her wrap. She rode the elevator down alone and stepped out amidst the beautiful decorations adorning the ornate lobby. Giant golden ornaments hung suspended from the 20-foot ceilings. In the center of the lobby, one of the biggest trees she'd ever seen indoors stood proud, gaily decorated in a theme similar to the one in her room, but with much larger decorations. A large ceramic nativity display, painted only in mother-of-pearl, sat under the tree. Joseph stood at least 3 feet tall, his paint shimmering under the lights. Somehow, everything said Christmas festive, despite the 80-degree weather outside. It lifted Faith's heart and made her not miss the busy London streets so much. With a smile, she approached the desk clerk.
Do you mind if I leave my key with you? I'm afraid I didn't plan outfits well, and ended up with no pockets for the evening,
she said. Of course, Miss Green. We'll have it right here for you after the event, the clerk answered, smiling. How in the world had the desk clerk known her name? Clearly the Viscolli Hotel Key West had earned all 25 points of its solid 5-star rating. Impressed, Faith slid her key over the mahogany counter. She crossed back through the lobby and followed the signs to the grand ballroom. Several sets of doors stood open, and Faith could see dozens of people milling about and could hear the sound of a string orchestra playing somewhere inside. Faith! She turned at the sound of her name and saw her boss, Elizabeth Gaines, waving at her from just inside the doors. Happy to see someone she knew right away, Faith smiled and walked to the woman. When she saw who stood next to her, she almost stopped in her tracks. Tony, his wife, and TJ were all right there. It had been 3 days since the time on the beach, and Faith had found herself thinking of them several times a day. Faith, I would love to introduce you to our sponsor and host of the air show, Mr. Tony Viscolli, his wife Robin, and this is their son TJ. Elizabeth introduced as she reached out and pulled Faith toward her. Tony Viscolli. In that moment, Faith Green suddenly realized that Tony Viscolli was the Tony Viscolli. This was his hotel even. That made TJ the eldest and only son of the Tony Viscolli. She could feel her eyes widen at the realization as all the pieces clicked into place. Elizabeth looked at Tony. Faith is our very best pilot. She flies our North American NA-16 in the show. Tony smiled and held out his hand. I've had the very great pleasure of meeting Faith a few days ago. If I had known your last name, I would have contacted you sooner. It is such an honor to see you again, he said. I never had a chance to properly introduce you to my lovely bride. Before Faith knew what happened, Robin enveloped her in a hug. Thank you again, Robin Viscolli said as she stepped back, If you hadn't been there—" "Mom," TJ cautioned, laying his hand on his mother's back. "She was there. You have to stop worrying about it. God handled it. Let it go." He turned to Faith and smiled a charming smile that made her heart skip a beat. "We haven't been formally introduced yet. My name is Antonio Francis Viscolli, Jr. Everyone calls me TJ. I'm very pleased to meet you, Miss Green." He extended his hand in greeting. Faith placed her hand in his and immediately noticed how warm his skin felt.
"How does one get TJ from Antonio Francis?"
He grinned, apparently used to the question. "Tony Jr. TJ. Call me whatever you like, as long as you promise never to say Francis again."
"Well, then, TJ, never Francis. I'm very glad to formally make your acquaintance."
"The pleasure is mine, and I haven't forgotten our rain check," he said. He had yet to release her hand. She had thought he looked handsome in a pair of swim trunks, but she had no idea someone could look so devastating in a tuxedo.
"Time is getting short,"
she said with a flirtatious smile.
"You only have until the new year before I'll be back across the pond."
"Well then, I better cash in tonight," he said, bringing her hand up to his lips. Faith felt a flush cover her cheeks and realized she didn't know what to say. She could hear Elizabeth asking Tony and Robin what happened, but she couldn't break away from TJ's dark gaze.
"I look forward to it,"
she whispered, retrieving her hand and fighting the impulse to rub the spot where his lips had touched. "The chef here's pretty amazing," TJ confided.
"Sure you have room for supper? Not too full of seawater, are you?"
Faith teased, making TJ grin. In a similar tone, he retorted, "I like to think of seawater as more of an appetizer." Robin cleared her throat, and Faith realized she'd been staring into TJ's eyes. Embarrassed, she shifted her attention to the tall, beautiful blonde woman. "I asked," Robin repeated with a smile, her eyes communicating her approval of the dawning attraction between Faith and her son, "how long have you been flying?"
"Flying?"
Fighting the impulse to shake her head to clear it, Faith reached up and touched her pendant, trying to find her center again.
"My entire life, really. My grandmother taught me practically since I learned to walk."
"Really?"
"She was from America, Texas to be precise. When she was 19, she flew over to help with the war in Europe. She was in a special band of women they nicknamed the Virtues. She piloted freedom fighters, refugees, and supplies in and out of Nazi-occupied France."
"I know the Virtues," TJ said as he put a hand on the small of her back. "Was your grandmother Helen Mulberry Green?" Faith's eyes widened and she looked back at him.
"How is it that you know that?"
"Of course. You're her granddaughter. Her code name was Faith." He looked at her in such a way that she felt her heart rate increase. Quietly, almost privately, he said, "You have her eyes." At a loss for words, Faith said,
"I'm afraid you very much have the advantage of me, TJ."
TJ ignored the remark and said, "I would love to talk with you about your grandmother sometime. Did she ever tell you about her last mission?" Tony laughed and wrapped an arm around his son's tuxedo-clad shoulders. "My son is a historian, and that particular conflict is his specialty." Faith turned so she faced Tony.
"Is that so?"
With a nod, TJ slipped his hands into his pockets. "When I was 15, I came across a book about Grace Auberton and what she did in occupied France called Code Name Grace, and I've been hooked ever since. It is absolutely fascinating to me. I've made it my primary course of study in writing my thesis for my PhD. The Virtues were amazing, and I've collected everything I can on them." "Which, alas, has very little to do with operating Viscolli Enterprises," Tony offered with a sigh that was only mostly belied by the loving grin on his face. "That's why you have Madeline," TJ said with a laugh. "Leave it all to my baby sister." "Oh, yes, and leave you to your books," Tony said, interrupting him. "I got the message. Despite your difference in age, she'll likely get her MBA before you even finish school." Robin apparently decided to change the subject. She slipped her arm through her husband's. "Faith, this air show is Tony's Christmas present to TJ." Considering what expenses went into an air show, and knowing what Elizabeth charged, Faith couldn't fathom a gift of that kind of extravagance.
"I beg your pardon?"
Tony waved a hand in the air. "It is not entirely just his present. I've worked with the city for some time to bring your show here and helped fund some of it. We brought our entire family down from Boston to enjoy it, but TJ's love of it is what prompted the initial inquiries. And unless his mother got him a sweater, he doesn't have any other presents this year." "I'm sure Mom got me a helmet and a snorkel," TJ laughed as he flagged down a waiter and grabbed a glass of ice water. He held it out to Faith, who happily accepted it, if for nothing more than to give her hands something to do. "I can't believe the living granddaughter of one of the Virtues is participating in the show." He looked at his father with a grin. That was the surprise you were talking about, isn't it? See, Tony said, smiling. Faith took a sip of water and said,
The North American NA-16 I fly, Texas Diamond, is my grandmother's most prized possession. Gran loves the fact that I've been able to bring so much joy to so many people by flying her at shows like this.
Loves? Helen Green is still alive?
Yes, of course. She lives in a home in Suffolk. I've been sending her a postcard each day since I've been here.
Elizabeth interjected. Faith's grandmother and grandfather both flew in the war, and her cousin Alfred flies one of our P-51 Mustangs with us.
He flies the Yellowtail that flew with the 352nd Fighter Group out of the 8th Air Force.
I'll see if I can find him and introduce you. I would absolutely love that, TJ said sincerely. He bent closer to Faith. What a fascinating family history. I'd love to talk with you more about it. Faith took another sip of her ice water.
Well, you know where to find me now,
she said coyly, wondering where this flirtatious side of her had come from. Never in her life had she batted her eyes at a man until just that moment. A uniformed waiter appeared at Tony's side and said something low in his ear. Tony grinned and turned to Elizabeth. It would appear that dinner is ready to be served. Let's see if we can get all these people to their seats. He turned to Faith. Miss Green, would you do me the distinct honor of joining my family at our table? TJ extended his elbow, and Faith shifted the glass of water to her left hand and laid her right hand over his forearm. He patted the tops of her fingers with his right hand, and they proceeded toward the front of the room. The Viscollis occupied the head table, but numerous family members, in-laws, and close friends apparently occupied the satellite tables nearby. The smiles and interested looks she drew from them as she approached the head table on TJ's arm made Faith feel giddy and nervous all at once. She looked forward to a very interesting evening. Chapter 3. Faith sat on the dry sand and looked out at the ocean. A full moon bathed the beach in a silvery light. It allowed her to see beyond the darkness of the night, but the empty waters and the vacant beach also helped her feel alone and isolated. At nearly 1 a.m, no sound but the gentle surf lapping over and over onto the shore broke the silence of the night, which is why, when someone sat down next to her, a startled cry escaped her lips and she nearly jumped out of her skin. Sorry, TJ apologized, loosening the bow tie at his neck and unbuttoning the top button. I thought for sure you saw or heard me coming. Faith put a hand to her chest.
Quite all right. Must have been wool gathering.
So that she would not have to consider just how handsome this man looked in the starlight, she looked back out at the water. The silvery moonlight reflecting on the crystal clear waters shimmered like a diamond mine. She thought about how nice it was to not feel so alone at the moment, surrounded as she was by the raw beauty all around them. I'm really looking forward to the show next week, TJ confided. Faith nodded.
Elizabeth does a beautiful job with coordination and choreography. I've flown in a few shows, and hers is by far the best one.
She brought her legs up so she could rest her cheek on her knees. She had her face turned to look at him.
If I could only sleep.
Jet lag?
Mm-hmm,
she said, closing her eyes.
I get it so badly.
My father has spent his entire career bouncing from one time zone to another and has never even yawned. It drives me nuts. I get jet lag when the time changes in the fall. Faith smiled and opened her eyes again.
What's your father really like? What does he do?
TJ shrugged. Whatever he wants. If a business looks interesting to him, he acquires it. He picked up a piece of driftwood the size of a stick of gum and started breaking it into smaller pieces. To me, it's overwhelming, thinking about the thousands of little details he has to keep up with every day.
So you hide in your books?
TJ snorted a laugh. Not too much, but that's what my baby sister says. She's always been there in his office every chance she could get. She has his mind for it. Me, not so much. An only child herself, Faith asked,
What is the age difference between you and your sister?
He met her eyes, and she could tell he was pleased that she had asked a somewhat personal question. I'm a little more than 2 years older than she.
Ah,
Faith said, nodding.
And how old is she?
TJ grinned at her roundabout question. I think I know what you're asking. I'm just 2 months older than you, Faith. Shocked, she demanded.
How do you know how old I am?
He waggled his eyebrows. I have my ways. She could feel the heat on her cheeks and decided to change the subject back to safer territory.
So, what are you going to do with your PhD?
Write, teach, publish, teach. I have dozens of ideas. If I didn't have to write so many papers for school, I'd be able to get some books written. This coming semester is my last one. Then I'll start writing for me. Faith slipped the shawl off her shoulders and spread it behind her. Then she leaned back, letting the shawl serve as a barrier between her elbows and the sand.
Sitting still and writing? I couldn't sit long enough to write a check, much less an entire book.
But you can sit still long enough to fly from London to New York. With a dismissive gesture of her hand, Faith said,
That's entirely different.
Not so much. TJ stretched out on his side, facing her, his head propped up with his hand. He reached over and ran a finger over the bare skin of her forearm. I really enjoyed you sitting with us at dinner tonight. Faith thought back to the dinner and the tables of the Viscolli family. In what seemed like a whirl, she met aunts, uncles, young and old cousins, and lifelong friends. She didn't think she'd ever met a happier, closer group of people in her life.
It was rather amazing. I'm afraid my family is just me and Grandmom. Well, and some cousins.
No brothers or sisters? TJ asked. Faith felt a little bit like a schoolgirl with a crush all of a sudden.
Just me. Grew up rather spoiled, I should think. Not like your family.
TJ gave her a one-sided grin. I have a remarkable family, and they liked you very much, spoiled or not. She felt a flush tinge her cheeks and hoped the night served to disguise it. What she wanted to say was that she liked him very much, but she was afraid to say it. Instead, she just smiled.
I enjoyed talking to Peter O'Farrell. I have a friend who is from the same county as he.
You'll rarely meet anyone more faithful to God than that man. You should hear his testimony.
I would probably enjoy that very much.
He's getting old,
but he's still in great health.
He blames corned beef and cabbage. Faith smiled a smile that bared her teeth. She really liked this attractive man.
My grandmom's health is starting to fail, I'm afraid.
TJ met and held her gaze. It is incredible that she's still living. What a blessing that must be for you to have had your whole life to get to know her. I would love to meet her and talk with her.
She's the last one I checked.
Faith nodded, feeling her smile fade. Every year as Remembrance Day or the anniversary of the Normandy invasion neared, Faith had to beat back an army of reporters looking for some human interest quote from the war hero. They hounded her grandmother in recent years with a ferocity that fully equaled the anonymity and obscurity that surrounded her for decades after the actual war ended.
The Last Living Virtue. There's a book there, I suspect.
Apparently out of the blue, TJ changed the subject. Faith, will you join me for dinner tomorrow night? Just the two of us? She turned her body toward him and rested her weight on one elbow.
That depends, I suppose,
she answered. He reached out and took her free hand, running a thumb over her knuckles. Depends? On what? Faith raised an eyebrow.
On whether you want to take me to dinner because you're attracted to me. Or perhaps because I saved your life the other day. Or is it because I'm Faith Green, the granddaughter of Helen Green, the famous virtue?
TJ said, There's only one possible answer to all those questions. Faith raised an eyebrow.
And that is?
He smiled his most charming smile. Yes. Faith sat up, her tone very flat.
That's rather what I thought. Pity.
TJ's eyebrows came together in a sharp frown. I don't understand.
As the son of the very rich and very powerful Tony Viscolli, I should think you actually do understand.
Faith pushed herself to her feet and bent down to pick up her shoes and shawl.
Once you have it sorted, you know how to contact me.
Chapter 4. Faith sat at a booth in the airport's restaurant. A glass of ice water sat next to a half-eaten tuna sandwich, but she ignored the food and drink. Instead, she penned a postcard to her grandmom. 3 days till Christmas. Will miss you very much. Can't wait to give you the present I found for you. Be nice to the night nurses. Much love, Faith. As she looked up from the postcard, she felt her eyes widen when she saw TJ Viscolli march into the cafe, look around, then head straight for her. He wore a pair of khaki shorts, a short-sleeved button-down Hawaiian-style shirt with Christmas trees all over it, and leather deck shoes with no socks. He slid into the booth across from her. Here you are, he greeted with a smile, stripping his sunglasses off and slipping them into the pocket of his colorful shirt.
Here I am?
She couldn't help but make it sound like a question. Yes, I've been calling your hotel room since 8 this morning, and you don't have a cell phone. It was a bit of a trial to find you. Reaching across the table, he took her hand. I'm very happy I did. With a raised eyebrow, Faith asked,
Why is that?
TJ grinned. Okay, first, because you're beautiful. But also, I enjoyed the party last night, especially the times you were telling stories about flying or England. I enjoyed being alone with you on the beach more than anything, and I definitely want to get to know more about you.
I'd like to get to know more about you as well.
Faith smiled, then observed the bruise on the side of his head.
How is your noggin?
He reached up and fingered the angry contusion near his temple. Still a little sore. Guess my guardian angel was on duty.
Interesting choice of words.
She squeezed his hand and pulled hers out of his grip so that she could sit back against the bench.
I also believe God looked after your safety and made sure you were saved.
By you. Faith shrugged.
Perhaps. Or perhaps it doesn't have anything to do with me. Could have been anyone.
I don't think so. He tapped the table in front of him with a finger. I think you got a tap on the shoulder from my guardian angel. All that time you spend in the air and all. Perhaps. She put the cap on her pen and set it aside, although I'll confess I'm not entirely comfortable with the idea. What could be more comforting than to know you're in the place where God would have you right at the perfect time? I would, and do, find extreme comfort in that notion. Faith pursed her lips.
Wouldn't it just have been easier to prevent you from bashing your head in the first place?
He looked at her with serious eyes. The look made the breath catch in the back of her throat. Then I wouldn't have found you. Or more to the point, you wouldn't have found me.
We would have met last night at dinner,
she said on a breath. I don't think it would have had the same impact as tripping over my breathless body, honestly. He laughed and looked at his watch. How much time do you have today?
I have to be in my North American at 2:30.
2:30? He asked, eyebrows furrowed and clearly in need of clarification.
Right, 2:30.
He smiled. Then we have more than 2 hours. What would you like to do?
Why do you assume I'd like to do anything?
He winked at her. Because you looked happy to see me. Faith laughed.
Perhaps I simply found your shirt amusing.
TJ smiled. Well, it is. He spread his hands as if presenting an obvious conclusion. But I'm not sure someone dressed like a whack is at liberty to criticize.
Not a whack, Faith corrected automatically,
suddenly conscious of her rather ill-suited and somewhat masculine-looking attire. That was American. British was waff. You're right. Silly mistake, TJ redressed. Just don't shoot me down here, Faith. She slid out of the booth with a shake of her head.
Very well. I would like to see Ernest Hemingway's house before I return home. I understand it's covered with cats. More than that, I'd love to see your favorite part of Key West, Florida. Your father said you've been coming here every winter your entire life. So surely you have a berth of your very own.
As a matter of fact, he announced as he stood next to her and laid a gentle hand on the small of her back. I do. They went out into the parking lot, and he gestured toward a blue pickup truck. I'm in the truck, he said. I had to haul some mulch for Nelson today. He opened the door, and she slid into the scorching hot interior.
Who is Nelson?
She asked as he climbed into the driver's seat and closed his door. The air conditioner started blowing ice-cold air as soon as he started the engine. Nelson's our landscaper/gardener. He's pretty amazing. TJ whipped the truck out onto the road and followed the coastline, passing the hotel. He turned down a residential street, and suddenly the businesses disappeared and gave way to estates. Palm trees adorned with Christmas lights shaded massive stucco homes sheltered by red Spanish tile roofs. Wood-framed homes the size of small hotels and painted in pastels stood out among the Spanish styles. The beauty of the architecture and the landscaping was not lost on Faith. TJ turned into a driveway and pulled up to a large wrought iron gate with a massive scrolling brass V down the center. As the truck approached, the gate gently swung open. As they rode down the palm tree-lined drive, Faith admired the beautiful tropical flowers in full bloom. It felt like the house was part of the environment rather than the other way around. TJ didn't pull up in front of the house, though. Instead, he drove around back past the swimming pool and headed toward a little house in the far corner of the property. He stopped at the door, cracked all the windows, and turned off the engine. Immediately, Faith felt the heat again. It was incredible. She gratefully escaped the hot confines of the truck cab when he opened her door. This is my spot, he said, gesturing to the small framed structure, mimicking the main house in paint and roof style. We think it was originally a gardening shed, but my dad let me have it when I was 8. Nelson wouldn't think this place was big enough to store his rake. He pulled a key out of his pocket and unlocked the door. Faith stepped up and into the one-room building. It took a moment for her eyes to adjust, but when they did, the interior took her breath away. A desk stood in the middle of the room with a comfortable-looking desk chair behind it. An oriental rug covered the floor. Bookshelves lined 2 of the walls from floor to ceiling. The other walls were covered in photographs, posters, and World War II paraphernalia. As Faith stepped further into the room and started inspecting, she realized it was mostly about the war in Europe and the French occupation. A shelf in one corner held a collection of very detailed model airplanes. She ran her fingertip over a perfect replica of her grandmother's North American NA-16, the Texas Diamond. She found one display that had dozens of pictures of the virtues, including a few pictures of her grandmother as a young woman. She recognized all of the women. In her lifetime, she'd even met a few of them.
"How did you come by all this?"
she asked. She felt in absolute awe of the collection. "I've spent the better part of a decade collecting it all," TJ said, walking up to her. "When I need to work, I come here. Most of the time, I'm alone on the estate, and I can just write without distraction."
"Well, if you sought to impress me, TJ Viscolli, I say well done, you. This is amazing,"
Faith admitted, turning in a circle.
She felt like she could immerse herself for hours just looking at the posters.
TJ put his hands on her shoulders and smiled down at her. "You fit in here," he observed, looking her up and down from the toes of her boots to her flight suit, to hair that had to be insanely wild after being confined in a helmet all morning. Her heart felt a rush of warmth, then started beating a little faster. A bit out of breath, she fought the schoolgirl crush feeling and kept her feet firmly planted on the ground.
"I see. Am I intended to be a recent addition to your private collection, Mr. Viscolli?"
For a second, a look of confusion clouded his eyes. Then his brows drew together in a frown of actual displeasure. "You need to stop accusing me of being interested in you just because of your name or who your grandmother is."
"Isn't that what you're doing?"
"Of course not." His fingers squeezed her shoulders before he released her and stepped back. "The fact is, I find myself incredibly attracted to you. I haven't been able to get you out of my mind since opening my eyes on the beach, which was, if you recall, before I knew who you were." Faith conceded the point.
"That's very true. My apologies."
"So I guess the question is, why are you so bent on thinking those are my motivations?" With a shrug, she moved to a display of helmets.
"I'm not certain. Perhaps I don't want to engage in some wildly romantic fling that must inevitably end at the very stroke of the new year."
She felt her cheeks flush with heat at the admission. To her surprise, when she turned around to face him again, he'd come up behind her. He put his arms around her. "I can be wildly romantic," he growled. She honestly didn't feel like she could catch a breath.
"I think that's what I'm afraid of."
"No need to be afraid of me, Faith."
"No?"
He shook his head. "I'm serious."
"It's very hard to take you seriously while you're wearing that shirt."
He grinned and reached a hand up to cup her cheek. "It doesn't have to end at the stroke of 12, Faith. You aren't Cinderella." She might not be Cinderella, but TJ Viscolli certainly seemed like a prince.
Her lips tingled, and she suddenly realized that she really, really wanted to kiss him.
No sooner had she thought it than he lowered his head. One heartbeat before their lips touched, someone pounded on the door.
Faith jumped back and put a hand to her heart.
"Got my mulch, boy?"
Someone yelled through the door. TJ sighed and slipped his hands back into his pockets. "I do," he said loud enough to carry, going to the door and opening it.
"You couldn't see it in the back of the truck?" "Well, it ain't going to unload itself. Get out here and help me."
"I have a guest, Nelson," TJ explained, gesturing toward Faith.
"I'll help you after I take her back to the airfield."
Feeling a well of nervous energy, Faith smiled and stepped closer to TJ.
"Not at all. I'll gladly lend a hand as well." She looked down at the small, skinny man with the dirty blue baseball cap. "I'm Faith."
"Nelson,"
he said, holding his hand out.
"Pleased to meet you."
As she shook Nelson's hand, she looked back at TJ. She could tell by the look on his face that unloading mulch was the last thing TJ Viscolli wanted to do. But he didn't argue. Instead, he glared at Nelson. "Let's get it done, then." Chapter 5. Faith pulled the goggles down from the top of her helmet and covered her eyes with them. She took the stick in her gloved hand. After a thumbs up from her engineer, she pushed the throttle forward and taxied down the runway. In no time, she was airborne. Minutes later, she checked her position in the formation of 6 vintage aircraft. As she looked over, she saw her cousin Alfred and smiled. He gave her an answering grin and broke away from the formation to begin his stunts. As Faith flew the routine she'd done 100 times before, she couldn't stop her mind from wandering. TJ had taken her to dinner every night that week. She couldn't believe how much she'd enjoyed herself. Working in a field dominated by confident men, she'd never really been open to being pursued. She'd had a few boyfriends here and there in her 24 years, but never anything serious. For some reason, she didn't feel like TJ belonged in the casual relationship corner of her mind. The man dominated her thoughts. Even now, while performing a highly complicated stunt routine, she couldn't stop thinking of him.
He was careful not to bring up her grandmother, but the lack of talking about it was almost as bad as if he showed an interest.
She knew he was just trying to reassure her that he was interested in her and not her family history. And maybe he had started to understand on some level. She imagined people had tried to befriend TJ his entire life just to get close to his father. She suddenly wondered if he could ever trust anyone's motivations at the outset of any relationship. How did he handle that? How did a family that came across as so open and loving handle that? Somehow, in the course of a few days and nights, they had become a couple, if only informally. They closed every evening with a stroll on the beach, where they ended up sitting in the very same spot they'd occupied on the night of the party. They talked for hours about flying, family, history, America, England. They talked about everything.
And just when he would get a serious look in his eye, just when she knew he wanted to recapture that moment right when he was about to kiss her in his office, she would push herself to her feet and bid him good night.
Why? Why not let him kiss her? He was breathtakingly handsome, smarter than almost anyone she'd ever known,
shared her love and her passion for the history of the Second World War,
and was wealthy well beyond her personal experience. Why not let him kiss her? Because it was Christmas Eve. And in a week she'd leave this beautiful patch of the Atlantic Ocean and go back home to her island. She was afraid that if she let him kiss her, she'd fall completely in love with him. Maybe if she didn't let him kiss her, her heart wouldn't break so badly as she already knew it would. On cue, she broke away from the pack and executed a series of roles. She often wished they'd pipe in the crowd's responses when they performed their stunts. It would be amazing to hear the cheers and know what worked and what didn't. Of course, they'd all seen the recordings of the events many times, so they were able to hear the applause later, but she suspected it wasn't the same as a live response. As a team, the 6 planes rode in the sky and formed a Christmas star. Faith knew they all performed perfectly, and that the star would look amazing against the vivid blue sky. She regained the formation and watched as Alfred came back. They flew low to the ground, buzzed the spectator stand, then straight back up, centered with the runway beneath, and started to break off one at a time to land. Faith took her turn, shot to the right, and went to shoot up and turn around to prepare for landing when a hard jolt threw her plane to the side, and an explosive noise startled her. She shot her head to the right and saw Alfred's plane in a spin rolling away from hers. He'd hit her. Several feet of her right wing had completely vanished. Every emergency scenario she knew and had practiced darted through her mind as she battled the stick. Then every emergency scenario she had only even heard of that ended in survival flashed through her mind. In a few heartbeats, Faith had assessed all of her options. She didn't have the altitude to trade for speed, so she could ditch over the water. She didn't have the speed to trade for altitude for a slow and low landing on the northbound runway. But she had guts, she had brains, and she had the Texas Diamond. She pulled out of the uncontrolled left bank, her rudder to the maximum and her stick against the firewall. She fought to control the right roll, battling and coaxing the broken machine. As the runway raced up at her, she prayed out loud. "Please, God, strength is what I need now," she begged, as she pulled up hard on the stick. If she could survive this, it would be a miracle, a bona fide answer to prayer. No matter what happened, she had to protect the bystanders and spectators below, even if she didn't walk away from this one. Faith really wanted to walk away from this one. As the entire planet came rushing up at her, she struggled to land. It wasn't going to be pretty, but she'd take a rough landing given a choice. She lowered her landing gear and aimed for the dotted line. To her very great relief, she felt the struts lock into place before the runway greeted the aircraft. As much as Faith wanted to, she didn't close her eyes when she felt the wheels scrape the runway, bounce off, and scrape again. Finally, the wheels gently touched the runway and rolled. Faith pulled the stick all the way back with both hands, screaming with exertion and strain. Her feet felt like they might punch all the way through the floorboards. Her back muscles burned with the exertion as she stood up on the brakes. She had to stop. She had to stop. Now. As she brought the plane to a complete stop, she felt all the breath evacuate from her lungs. She gasped and swallowed deep lungfuls of air before she popped the canopy and slid her helmet off. Her whole body shook with fear and adrenaline. She needed to get out of the aircraft's confines. As she started to climb out, she heard the impact of Alfred's plane accompanied by shocked screams from the bleachers. Her head shot in that direction, and she saw the billowing black smoke coming from a field several hundred yards off the runway. As she climbed out of the aircraft and started to run on rubbery legs toward the impact site, Elizabeth pulled up in a Jeep. "He jettisoned!" She yelled and pointed at the sky. "Look!" Faith looked up and saw the parachute carrying her cousin safely away from the burning wreckage. "Oh, thank you, God! Thank you, Lord above!" she prayed, and felt her knees completely give out from under her. Elizabeth appeared at her side instantly. "No," Faith said, waving at her with a weak hand. "Please, go get Alfred. I'm okay. I'll just wait right here. Come with me." "No, I need the earth beneath me just now," Faith explained. Nausea rolled around in her stomach, and she didn't think she would be able to handle jostling through a field in a four-wheel drive vehicle. She put a shaking hand to her forehead and leaned her head back against the plane's wheel. A minute or two after Elizabeth drove away, Faith heard footsteps pounding down the runway toward her. She opened her eyes, expecting to see her engineer or another pilot. Instead, to her surprise, TJ Viscolli raced toward her, his face pale and his eyes wide. She realized he was calling her name. "Faith! Faith!" She slowly rose to her feet. Her knees felt like they were made of water, and her stomach felt light. Her peripheral vision began to dim with each heartbeat, and she realized that she was experiencing mild shock. Perhaps 1 second before she would have simply fainted onto the concrete runway, TJ caught her in his surprisingly strong arms and held her upright on her feet. She studied his face, so concerned, so worried. His eyes were deep brown, the color of milk chocolate. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Are you all right?"
"Well, yes, I suppose I am. Made a bit of a bodge of it, though. I confess, I feel completely balmy."
When she saw the look of confusion on his face, she burst out laughing. His face never changed. "You are amazing, Faith. You're just reacting to the adrenaline. Why don't we sit back down?"
"I find that I rather like being in your arms,"
she said, looping hers over his neck. Her arms felt weak and rubbery, so she gripped her wrists with one hand to keep them up. She tripped against him, and he quickly turned his body and stepped back, stopping when his back hit her plane. "I have you trapped now," Faith said on a giggle, then stood on her toes and put her lips against his. Her first thought was how warm his mouth felt. Her second thought was how he didn't move. His hands stayed perfectly still, gripping her hips as if to pull her away, and his lips remained immobile. Undaunted, she pulled back and looked him in the eye.
"I know you want to kiss me. You've wanted to all week."
He cleared his throat. "Not like this."
"Like what? Like when I'm intoxicated on adrenaline? I'm still in my right mind, Viscolli. I'm so happy to be alive, and I'm incredibly happy to see you. So kiss me."
She watched his eyes flare with emotion before he put a hand along the side of her neck, his fingers on the back of her head, and crushed his mouth to hers. She didn't know if it was his kiss, or the rush of adrenaline and endorphins in her brain, but her head started spinning, and her heart felt like it might beat itself out of her chest. A roaring sounded in her ears, as she tightened her arms and stood back up on her toes, desperate to get closer to him. His arm tightened around her waist, and his other hand gripped the back of her hair while he kissed her, and kissed her, and kissed her. He finally slowed and gentled the kiss gradually, until their lips were just a whisper apart. She opened her eyes and saw him staring at her with such an intense expression in his chocolate brown eyes that she couldn't breathe. She slid a hand down to cup his cheek and felt her eyes well with tears. "I don't think I've ever been so scared in my life," TJ confessed in a whisper. "I thought I was going to lose you."
"I didn't think I was strong enough to land,"
she confessed.
"I just kept praying for strength."
He closed his eyes and placed his lips on her forehead before saying, "Thank you, God, for giving her strength." Faith felt the breath hitch in her throat. How could she ever say goodbye to this man? She pushed her head back enough to look him in the eye again.
"TJ,
Whatever she had been about to say, whatever foolish declaration of love she might have been about to express, was interrupted by the arrival of the emergency vehicles, followed closely by her cousin Alfred. She felt frustrated at the interruption, but turned as he launched himself out of Elizabeth's jeep and rushed toward her. "I thought I'd done us both in," he said, gripping her hands. "I caught a pocket of air that threw my control off slightly. Are you okay?"
"Just full of beans,"
she explained, squeezing his hands with hers.
"I saw that black smoke and thought you were gone."
"Rather pear-shaped. At impact, my canopy went up. It didn't take but a tick to know I'd never get back under control." His face scrunched up in a frown. The Mustang's toast. I have no desire to face Auntie Helen and tell her that. Faith shuddered. Don't make me go with you. Alfred pulled her into his arms. I'm so glad you're okay.
I'm glad you're okay,
Faith said against his flight suit. Chapter 6. Faith walked into the lobby of her hotel and found TJ in the seating area. He was picking her up to take her to celebrate Christmas Eve with his family. She had just come from her company's Christmas party and decided to keep the light red summer dress and strappy red sandals on. TJ wore dark slacks and a dark sports coat over a red golf shirt. As she drew closer, she was surprised to see that he held a little dark-haired girl asleep in his arms. When he spotted her, he inclined his head and smiled in greeting, but did not speak. The sight of him holding that little girl made her knees feel a little weaker and her heart beat a little faster, made some internal instinct deep inside of her spring to life. She strolled up to them and gently touched the black curls, looking down at the perfect face of the sleeping child.
Who's your new girlfriend, then?
She asked quietly. This is one of Peter O'Farrell's grandchildren. Do you remember Angel Dove from the big party last week? This is her youngest daughter. Angel asked me to come up here with her and bring a platter of Christmas cookies for the night staff. Little bit here fell asleep.
So precious,
Faith said softly. Excuse me, Miss Green, the concierge said, suddenly appearing at her elbow. You have an urgent telephone call. Faith frowned and turned to him.
Beg pardon?
There's a call for you. He gestured toward a white phone that sat next to her on a low table. You can use that phone. Just pick it up. Confused, Faith picked up the receiver.
Hello? This is Faith Green.
Miss Green, I'm Roger Halifax from Helen Green's long-term care home. I'm calling to inform you that your grandmother has been transferred to hospital. Faith lowered herself carefully into the chair next to the phone. Sounding perhaps more British than ever, she also clipped her articles and demanded.
She's in hospital? What's happened?
She suffered a heart attack, I'm afraid. The staff responded very quickly, but her situation is rather grave.
I'll be there as soon as I can. Thank you for calling at this hour and on the holiday,
she said. It had to be close to midnight on Christmas Eve in England. Godspeed, Miss Green, he said.
Goodbye,
she said, hanging up the phone. TJ lay the sleeping child on the couch before kneeling at her feet. What is it?
Grandmum,
Faith whispered.
I must go.
Tell me what you need.
Well, my plane is broken and slow at any rate. I think I shall require a ticket.
He shook his head. You'll never get out of here on Christmas Eve. Can you fly a Gulfstream G550?
What?
Her mind swirled with anxiety, details, fear.
Well, yes, I suppose.
I'm rated. TJ nodded and stood. Give me 10 minutes. Faith sat in the chair next to her grandmother's hospital bed, with her Bible in her lap hours later. She remembered always thinking that Grandmum was the strongest person she'd ever met. Faith looked down at the frail, thin body beneath the sheet and had some difficulty reconciling her grandmother's appearance with the memory of the vital woman she had known all her life. Since she could remember, Faith strove to be like her. She admired her strong faith, her confidence, and her sense of humor. Having already lost both parents, Faith fretted as she watched her grandmother struggle to breathe. She felt genuine fear that she wouldn't be able to accomplish anything without this amazing woman at her side. Each year on Christmas Day, her grandmother had read to her from the second chapter of Luke. This year, Faith read to her grandmother and prayed that the words comforted her even in her present state of sleep.
And behold, an angel of the Lord stood before them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were greatly afraid.
Her voice sounded clear despite her fatigue and concern.
Then the angel said to them, Do not be afraid, for behold, I bring you good tidings of great joy, which will be for all people. For there is born to you this day in the city of David a Saviour, who is Christ the Lord.
It occurred to Faith that she should not be afraid for her grandmother, even if she were to go home to be with the Father in heaven tonight. It would be right and proper to feel sadness at losing her companionship in this world, but it was not right to dread that grief in advance. It was actually selfish, and she closed her eyes and quickly repented in prayer. She ended her brief prayer with the words that Christ himself had used in the Garden of Gethsemane.
Not my will, but your will be done. Amen.
Faith sat back and gripped the diamond solitaire on her necklace. She still wore the red dress from the night before. She hadn't bothered to change. She hadn't even bothered to pack. TJ promised he'd take care of that for her before he whisked her off to the airport. He'd called his father and drove her to meet the pilot at the runway. Instead of turning the aircraft over to Faith, the pilot insisted on flying her himself, letting her right seat and serve as co-pilot for the transcontinental flight. TJ had cupped her face in his hands and kissed her goodbye, a very loving, sweet kiss that brought forth the tears she struggled to keep at bay. Then he slipped off his sports coat and laid it over her bare shoulders, reminding her that she'd need it once she landed in England. She and the pilot took off. They landed once in Iceland and refueled. By late morning, they landed just a short distance from the hospital in central England. Somehow, TJ Viscolli had arranged a limo to meet them at the terminal, and the driver whisked her off to her grandmother. Hours later, she sat and waited, and occasionally prayed. Why had she let Grandmom talk her into leaving her at Christmas time? Tears streamed down her cheeks as she thought about how alone she'd be when she lost her. Faith pulled up the collar of the sports coat and wrapped it around her face. The jacket smelled like TJ, and she inhaled, breathing him in. How could she miss someone so much she'd seen just 24 hours before? The door to the room opened, and she looked up, expecting to see a nurse, surprised to see TJ Viscolli.
"What are you doing here?"
she asked as she stood. He looked as if he'd just raced across an ocean. Like her, he still wore the clothes from the night before. A day's growth of beard shadowed his face, and his hair looked a bit unkempt. She put a hand on her own hair and imagined she didn't look any better. "I told you I'd get your stuff to you," he explained, holding up her suitcase. "I'm certain I got it all. Elizabeth said you had some stuff at the airport, but she'd take care of it."
"I was just thinking how much I'd wished you'd come along with me."
She surprised herself by confessing. She stood and walked over to him. After he set the suitcase on the ground, he opened his arms, and she easily walked into them. "I had to take care of your things first," he said. She could feel the rumble of his voice in his chest. "And I had to find my passport. I was afraid I didn't have it with me, and I'd have to stop back in Boston to pick it up." She squeezed her arms to hug him, then stepped back.
"I'm sorry to interfere with your Christmas with your family."
His eyes turned serious. There would be other Christmases. Suddenly nervous with the intensity of his look, she turned her body and gestured at her grandmother.
"Triple bypass. The cardiologist seems to think she'll pull through."
She walked back to the bed and picked up one of the frail hands.
Imagine that. 94 years old and surviving a triple bypass.
TJ came up behind her and put a hand on her waist. "She's an amazing woman, much like someone else I know."
"I always wanted to be like her."
"I like you being like you," he asserted, his lips against her hair. She could feel his body heat and realized she could step back just slightly and lean against him. Instead, she stepped closer to the bed and turned around.
"I was all prepared to tell you goodbye on New Year's Day."
He raised an eyebrow. "Why?" With a shrug, she ran her fingers through her hair.
"Because we live in two different worlds. It's impossible to think that something like this could somehow work. It's just a fairy tale."
Instead of addressing that, he slipped his hands into his pockets and leaned against the wall. "Did you know that my father knew, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that he was in love with my mother after just an hour in her company?" Faith felt her palms start to sweat and gripped the bed rail behind her.
"Afraid I don't understand."
He nodded. He did. My Aunt Maxine made him a birthday dinner. Before that, he'd only seen my mom once or twice, and only in passing. So at the dinner, he sat next to her for about an hour. That night, he knew he'd spend the rest of his life with her. He stepped forward and stopped just a foot from her. He reached out and took the lapel of his own jacket in his hand. "I woke up on that beach and was certain I'd died and drowned, and was looking at my own personal angel. Then, within a few hours in your presence, I knew." Faith licked her suddenly very dry lips.
"You knew what?"
"I knew that this wasn't going to be our only Christmas together. I knew that there would be many, many more." He opened the jacket and slipped his hands into the inside pocket, pulling out a small package wrapped in bright red paper. "I came right behind you because I didn't want us to spend our first Christmas apart." He looked at his watch. "It's still Christmas here for another 30 minutes.
"How can we?"
she started to ask on a whisper, but TJ interrupted her. "How can I possibly study World War II history from the shores of England?" "I don't know, Faith. What do you think?" He smiled as he held out the package. "Merry Christmas, Faith Green. She took the package with shaking hands and unwrapped it. When she saw what it contained, she gasped out loud and felt tears flood her eyes.
How?
She ran her fingers over the full carat diamond that lay embedded in the fiber of the vintage flight logbook. 75 years before, an artist's brush had painted a Texas Lone Star flag in the shape of the state of Texas and a stylized diamond in the center. The words Texas Diamond emblazoned the bottom of the symbol in brush script on the U.S. Air Force blue fabric. The airplane itself, a North American NA-16 christened Texas Diamond, had been a Christmas present from her great-grandfather to her grandmum. That year, the logbook had been the item he had wrapped and placed under the tree. I acquired it from a collector about 6 years ago. I think I paid more for it than what I would have for the plane.
This is the most amazing thing anyone has ever given to me,
she said, tears streaming down her face. Good. My father always said, begin as you mean to go on. He cupped her wet cheek and ran a thumb under her eye, catching a fresh tear. Here's my plan. I'm going to finish this semester of school, become Dr. Viscolli, and move to London.
Move to London? Why?
TJ smiled and cupped her other cheek. Because that's where you live, and I love you. I know we only met a week ago, but I know in my soul that God arranged that meeting. And I've never been one to tell him no. With her heart soaring higher than she'd ever flown in a plane, Faith grinned.
I've spent the better part of the last week falling in love with you. Honestly, I was dreading coming home.
With a smile, he whispered, Now you can just prepare for me to come home. Faith looked once more at the logbook.
Afraid I didn't get you anything for Christmas.
TJ pulled her closer. I'll settle for a kiss.
Well then, Happy Christmas, TJ Viscolli,
she whispered, as he pressed his lips to hers and kissed her with a promise of forever. The end. Christmas Diamond, a novella, inspired by the Jewel series and the Virtues and Valor series, written by Hallee Bridgeman. The novella Christmas Diamond was inspired by real events. Every story in the Virtues and Valor series is inspired by real people and real events. This story is no exception. The mid-air collision described in Chapter 5 of Christmas Diamond between a P-51D Mustang and a North American NA-16 is based on an actual mid-air collision that occurred on July 10th in 2011 between similar aircraft. On that Sunday at just after 5 in the afternoon, a Douglas AD-4N Skyraider registered FAZDP collided with a P-51D Mustang registered DFBBD, dubbed Big Beautiful Doll. The collision occurred just 800 feet above the tarmac at the Duxford Flying Legends event, hosted by the Duxford Aerodrome in Cambridgeshire, England. The force of the collision was so great when the starboard, right-hand wing of the Skyraider collided with the lower rear fuselage of the Mustang that 4 feet of the wing of the Skyraider immediately sheared off at impact. The Mustang went into an uncontrolled spin. The Skyraider completed a full roll to the right after hitting the P-51 due to the sudden difference in lift between the two wings. Miraculously, despite the fact the 4-foot portion of the starboard wing was missing, the Skyraider's pilot managed to regain and then retain control of the single-engine vintage aircraft. The pilot completed a circuit and executed an emergency wheels-down landing at the airfield. The Mustang had descended to 500 feet by the time the pilot came to what he told reporters was the time of decision-making. He ejected from the aircraft, but had descended to just 200 feet by the time his parachute deployed. While jettisoning from the tumbling airplane, he struck the tail of the aircraft, nearly breaking his arm. The P-51 nosed in and was lost, but the pilot descended safely to the earth, with just bruises for the close call. You have been listening to Christmas Diamond, a novella, Part 5 of the Jewel series by Hallee Bridgeman. This story is immediately preceded by Sapphire Ice, Greater Than Rubies, Emerald Fire, and Topaz Heat. Find these stories today, along with other exciting titles by Hallee Bridgeman, wherever fine books are sold. Original copyright, 2013. All rights reserved. No part of this work may be reproduced or transmitted in any form or by any means without express written permission. The only exception is brief excerpts for critical articles or reviews. This book is published in all formats by Olivia Kimbrell Press. Olivia Kimbrell Press is a publisher offering true-to-life, meaningful fiction and nonfiction from a Christian worldview, intended to uplift the heart and engage the mind. The Olivia Kimbrell Press colophon and logo are trademarks of Olivia Kimbrell Press. Original cover art and graphics by Amanda Gale Smith. This audiobook was read by Gene Rowley and recorded and edited by Gene Rowley Voiceover. Some scripture quotations courtesy of the King James Version of the Holy Bible. Some scripture quotations courtesy of the New King James Version of the Holy Bible. Copyright owned by Thomas Nelson Incorporated. Used by permission. All rights reserved. This story is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either the product of the author's imagination or used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual events, organizations, places, locales, or to persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental and beyond the intent of either the author or publisher. Please ask your library or favorite bookstore about other fine titles by Hallee Bridgeman, including more books in the Jewel series. On behalf of everyone involved with this project, we hope you have deeply enjoyed this audiobook presentation and pray God's blessing on you today and always.